Hello, my name is Reed Silverne, and the name of the show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and proud of it. You notice that I have a tree in the background, a beautiful California view, and the reason is because I'm going to discuss the tree branches that go thick and very, very thick into corruption and who knows what else in our Congress and in our system of finance. Why am I talking about this, and why do I have a problem with our finance system? Well, I have to admit, it's personal, and I have a gripe. And my gripe is I lost 2/3 of my liquid fortune in the internet boom. I felt cheated, a lot of other people did. I had Enron stock, I had WorldCom, I had Lucent, and all of those ended up being frauds, and I'm a bit resentful about it. And a lot of other people are too. I'm also resentful that a lot of the principals, a lot of the people that have been found to have been frauds, and a lot of the people who have defrauded their employees, their investors, the people who invest in the stock market, all dependent on the fact that a real market is infinite or a nearly infinite number of people buying, a nearly infinite number of people selling, resulting in a stock and a price that's at equilibrium, and that really is set by the market. And what I learned, and what a lot of people have learned during the bubble of 1989, 1990, 1991, and again the next bubble of 2000, 2001, 2002, is that the market is not necessarily free. And the market is not necessarily set by market forces. And it's often set by people that are in it for themselves, that are manipulating prices up and manipulating prices down. Worst offender was Enron, and I don't know, I'm going to get into something that might be a little boring to people, but of course it's very interesting to me, considering that I'm one of the millions of victims, is that what Enron was doing was you have assets, which are the things I have, you have liabilities, those are the things I owe, and the difference is what you're worth. And what Enron was doing was taking what they had and exaggerating it, but even more so, taking what they owe and taking it off the books and putting it in phony partnerships, and so that what they had minus what they owed was a lot more than they were worth. And that's what set the stock price. And of course, when that collapsed, everything happened. And what Enron was doing was they were taking a market like electricity, deregulated electricity over in California, and they were setting the value of, there's never been a market in electricity because it's been regulated and controlled through the utility systems. They had lobbied for a market that was supposedly free, but of course open to manipulation. And then what they did is they set the value of their assets which hadn't been set by a market that never existed, at thousands of times more than they were really worth. And then they were taking their liabilities and taking them off the books. Once the market really started and these values collapsed or ended up being much lower than they reported in order to get their stock price up the previous year, all those assets now turn liabilities. All those losses were taken off the books, put in these partnerships, and then of course the next year Enron was showing a tremendous profit again. And of course I fell for it, millions of others fell for it. Pension brokers fell for it. Pensions collapsed left and right after Enron collapsed. That's little known. And of course, all the employees of Enron who had their life savings and 401k plans with Enron stock, they lost everything. They lost their jobs, they lost their retirement, they lost their life savings, and ended up absolutely dead broke. While Ken Lay is still out of jail. Why he hasn't been tried yet? It's 5 years later. I don't know, and I have some good ideas. But One of the reasons that it might be is because Ken Lay has a very, very close ally in a guy named Abramoff. Now, who is Abramoff? His name is Jack Abramoff, and he's a good friend of Tom DeLay, who's the majority leader, not Speaker of the House. He's the number 2 man in the Congress, not the number 1 man. And for many, many years, his very, very close ally is a fellow named Jack Abramoff. Jack Abramoff went to college with him, or was one of the original college Republicans, very, very close to Grover Norquist, the head of one of the anti-tax groups who lobbied for lower taxes, and oddly enough, of Richard Reed, the head of the Christian Coalition, who has since become a lobbyist and has been working with Abramoff. And what is Abramoff? He is a lobbyist. His number 2 man is a guy named Michael Scanlon, and Michael Scanlon worked directly for Tom DeLay for many, many years. In fact, had already become a lobbyist while he was still on the federal payroll. Now, for me, that's absolutely outrageous. I can't believe that somebody would become a lobbyist and get money for influencing Congress while still an aide to a senior congressman. That alone to me is outrageous. And I can't believe that that's legal. But every time I turn on talk radio, it appears to be legal. So what did DeLay do? And what did Abramoff do? Well, Abramoff was involved in a lot of things, but among them was funding a group called ARMPAC. And let's see if I can find ARMPAC. I know, here, there's TrumpPAC and ARMPAC. And ARMPAC, I think, is the Republican majority PAC. And then there's another PAC called TrimPAC. And TrimPAC is the Texas Republican majority PAC. And there's one scandal that he is involved in. ARMPAC is run, the director is Tom DeLay. The employee is his wife, Christine, and his daughter. And they are ARMPAC. ARMPAC raises hundreds of thousands, in fact, millions of dollars for the rest of the Republican congressmen. So if Tom DeLay gets in trouble, all of, or not all, but many of the Republican congressmen will get in trouble along with them because they've been funded, their campaigns are funded very much by Tom DeLay, who basically runs the congressional nest egg or war chest, I think it's called, for the Republicans in Congress. Now, I'm a Republican myself. I don't have a problem with the Republicans dominating Congress. In fact, I'm all for it. I do have a problem that ARMPAC was founded and initially funded by Ken Lay and Enron, who attended the first initial meeting and who provided $380,000 to ARMPAC at that first initial meeting and who started it off and gained a lot. Ken Lay's lobbyist on the Hill is Jack Abramoff. So, and Jack Abramoff hired Michael Scanlon, who worked for DeLay. So that's kind of how it goes. Now, what are the basic problems that Tom DeLay has nowadays? Well, there's two, but the main one is the relationship between a federal PAC, which is ARMPAC, and the Texas PAC, which is TrimPAC. Now, Tom DeLay had a wish very far back. Even while George W. Bush was governor of Texas, the Texas legislature was dominated by the Democrats. Now, as you know, when a state, the districts, the congressional districts are carved out of a state once every 10 years after the census. It's done by the party in power in the state legislature of that particular state. Sometimes with the governor, especially if they're the same party, and sometimes without. Now, some states have independent commissions. Usually the party that's out of power wants an independent commission, and the party that's in power wants to be able to call the shots themselves. One of Tom DeLay's absolute desires was to have the Republicans take over the Texas state legislature and then redistrict Texas so that the Republicans would dominate the congressional delegation in Texas. Tom DeLay is from Texas, and so you can see that's very close to his heart. So the state-oriented PAC had a relationship with Tom DeLay's personal federal PAC, ARM PAC, and basically laundered money from the federal PAC to the state PAC and straight into the pockets of the campaigns of the state legislators. Now that doesn't seem so bad. I'm sure that's done every day in most states, but in Texas, that's against the law. And there's a prosecutor in Texas that's already charged the leaders of Trim PAC and is charging some of the leaders of ARM PAC as well. All right, who's been charged? Under investigation, of course, is Scanlon, Michael Scanlon, Abramoff's partner. Charged with making and accepting illegal contributions, Warren Robold, a fundraiser associated with very closely with Tom DeLay. Charged with money laundering. Fundraising efforts there, an effort to use corporate contributions to control representative democracy in Texas. Jim Ellis, another political operative, charged with money laundering, the former head of Trim PAC, Texans for Republican Majority, John Caliandro, accused of diverting donations to the RNC, from the RNC, which is the Republican National Committee, Texas state candidates. It's illegal in Texas. And those are just a few. The Texas District Attorney is Ronnie Earl. He is a Democrat, so there is some politics going on. But all the politics in the world are not going to get you convicted if you didn't do anything. Texas for a Republican Majority Political Action Committee has money laundering, accepting illegal contributions during successful bid to fund Texas legislative candidates in the state. Jim Ellis is a former DeLay aide and director of the national fundraising vehicle, ARM PAC, that's ARM PAC, is among those indicted. So ARM PAC, of which DeLay has been the director, their individuals within that ARM PAC has already been indicted. And of course, Tom DeLay's wife worked for ARM PAC too. Hopefully, she doesn't do anything. She never went there. She's getting her salary as a ghost, because if she actually was a participant, she might know too much. She might end up indicted too. And then, of course, there's Jack Abramoff, who's been funneling money into ARM PAC for years and who has taken $66 million from 4 Indian tribes, Indian gambling tribes, and delivered almost nothing. But actually, they hasn't delivered almost nothing, because some of the money, probably 10 or 20%, has been funneled into Tom DeLay, ARM PAC, Trim PAC, and everything else. And 80 to 90% were put in the pockets of who? Michael Scanlon, Jack Abramoff, who, by the way, has been fired by one of the major lobbying companies. What are the problems? DeLay has been taking junket after junket and has been sent all over the world, to Russia, to Scotland, to England, all on by these fuzzy nonprofit foundations, which were actually given the money either by the tribes on the direction of Abramoff, or actually out of Abramoff's personal pocket. So that's another one of the problems. Now, you know, there's a few wrinkles over here, But of course, one of the wrinkles is the whole thing was funded and founded by Ken Lay and Enron, who were running a Ponzi scheme. Ken Lay was trying very, very hard in 2000 and 2001, really from 1993 on, to get legislation passed to deregulate the electricity markets. Now, the electricity grid is a utility, which means it's very, very closely regulated. But whoever supplies electricity can basically make a guaranteed profit. They determine what the costs are, and then they apply a kicker to it, and that is the amount that they're allowed to charge for electricity. There is no free market electricity. There hasn't been for many, many decades. However, this group that's funded by Ken Lay were really, really pushing for energy deregulation. They got it in California, where immediately the market was manipulated by Enron and some other companies that were in it with them, Williams, Reliant, and a couple actual producers of electricity. What they did in California is California had a couple very, very large utilities, biggest of which is Pacific Gas and Electric. Pacific Gas and Electric was forced to sell its actual electricity plants almost in the same manner as the sales up in Russia during the oligarch era. They were forced to sell at losses and or at very low prices to Enron, Reliant, Duke, and a couple other major private firms. And basically every single day or every single week, a plan would be, or an estimate would be provided to the state government that said, this is the demand expected for electricity against our plants during this particular period. Well, what Enron was doing is they would take a certain hour and they would multiply that estimate by 10 or 20 times. Now, these are documents that are signed under oath. They're official documents. Lies are considered to be a form of perjury. And there's no doubt about it. It's come out that within the Enron scandal and within all of the cases that have been at Enron, that there was a scheme called Get Shorty, where Enron would purposely persuade either one of the other companies, which of course is collusion, to increase the demand for a specific hour, or they do it themselves because they own some electricity plants themselves, and they would multiply by 10 or 100, and that would force an emergency in California. They declare an emergency auction, and basically the price could go to infinite. And it would go from $30 a kilowatt hour, I think a kilowatt hour, to 300 or 3,000. And I think FERC came out and said, well, anything over 1,500, which was 50 times the going rate, that's unreasonable. But anything under 1,500, when the average going rate was 30, that's reasonable. And ironically, right across the state line, right here in Arizona, the price out of the same grid, out of the same electricity lines, would be $30 or $40 a kilowatt hour, or when at the same time it would be 10, 20, 100 times as much in California. That didn't last long, and they finally broke that. But in the process, Enron and their friends made a lot of ill-gotten goods. However, that didn't satisfy Enron because, again, that was one of those markets. They had priced their assets on the unregulated market at thousands of times. So just getting 100 times for 1 or 2 hours in a week didn't really do it. They still had to take all that, which was below estimates, and fluff it off on these phony partnerships. And that's another story, and a long one, and a terrible one. The result was, when the last market was denied, and when Congress didn't pass the next unregulated market, and I believe that was And it's funny because all of a sudden Enron and Ken Lay became environmentalists. They wanted to create a market in free to control CO2 emissions. Now, CO2 is what they call greenhouse gas, and of course that was in response to global warming. So all of a sudden, Enron wanted to create this market trading the right to put out greenhouse gases, and they were, of course, ready to take all of their previous partnerships to slough it off on another partnership that owned, a trillion CO2 rights, and then double the amount of money they valued it at, and then make their investors double their money. Now, as a matter of fact, in one of those transactions, the money manager for CalPERS. CalPERS is the pension fund for the California state workers. And he came out there and he invested in one of these partnerships that Enron was putting out. And Enron said, look, if you invest in this partnership, which is this little set of losses, these losses are guaranteed to be bought out by a certain party who shall remain nameless at twice their value. And they were. And CalPERS made about $25 million. And of course, Enron went to CalPERS and said, oh, you've rolled the dice, you've rolled a 7, let it ride and roll it again. And he said, no, I'm not going to let it roll again. Give me $50 million and give it to me now. And that created a crisis within Enron. And that moment was the beginning of the end when Enron, their Ponzi scheme started to unravel. And they did manage to get $50 million in cash and give it to CalPERS. But other investors in these phony partnerships started to question. So they really needed money at the last minute. And one of the things they needed was a tax rebate of $256 million, which they were going to get, even though Enron had not paid any taxes. And that goes back to one of these trips that Tom DeLay made. So let's see if I can find it. Yes, here it is. A group of congressional figures joined House Majority Leader Tom DeLay under an ethics cloud stemming from foreign golf junkets, arranged by a lobbyist who, of course, is Jack Abramoff. DeLay landed in trouble last month over a 2000 trip to Scotland with a lobbyist, but 2 other congressmen and 3 House aides also played St. Andrews on separate junkets with the lobbyist and may have violated House records. House rules, records show. All omitted disclosing the key role of beleaguered lobbyist Jack Abramoff. One of Abramoff's golf guests was Robert Ney, chairman of the House Administration Committee. House Administration Committee is one of those key committees. He's the one that gives office space to the other congressmen. So they all owe him. And he said in congressional files that his trip was on a chartered jet, was sponsored and paid for by conservative think tank National Center for Public Policy Research. But the center told the LA Times that they did not sponsor, nor did they pay for his travels. And Representative Tom Feeney is also on that. Center said they didn't pay a single dime for the Feeney junket. Ney and Finney, though, through spokesman, blamed others for filing errors. So it was based on representations by Abramoff. Abramoff went with them. What are they doing going on a golf junket with a lobbyist, even if they do think it's being paid for by a nonprofit foundation? Abramoff had gone to one of the Texas tribes and said, I need $100,000 right away to pay for the golf trip. And he also paid $72,000 out of his own pocket, which is absolutely against House rules, to allow yourself to take something directly from a lobbyist. He paid $72,000 from a personal business account to charter the jet in advance of the Ney trip, records show. These folks have not been tied to any of these situations before. But the fact of the matter is, they went right into it right before the tax break had been done. My name is Reed Silverne. The name of the show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker. Proud of it.